When I walk into the Mount Zion and the Female Union Band Society cemeteries, I think about all the people that I researched and that I know their names, and sometimes I call out to them. It is the oldest Black cemetery in Washington, D.C. There are more than 8,000 to 10,000 people buried in both cemeteries. Specifically, people who were enslaved and formerly enslaved. We're working to preserve the cemetery, making it a historic memorial park where people will learn American history that a lot of people have forgotten. The demographics of Georgetown is predominantly white. It's not as diverse as it used to be. In 1840, it was 50% African American. Here we are in 2024. The population of Black people in Georgetown is probably less than 3%. And a lot of people don't know the history of Georgetown. And so I think it's really important and that we're not just a cemetery, we're also a place that is a truth teller. So this was the original entrance. You can still see seashells, which are very important to Black cemeteries, in the ground. They would put them on grave markers as a way of saying, the sea brought you here and it'll take you home.
This land represents 2 cemeteries.
In 1842, this side was purchased by a group of free Black women. Women could not purchase property then, white or Black. And so, like most Black women, we don't hear no, we hear there must be another way. And so these women were able to get a man to purchase the property and then basically sign it over to them. Going back to the old Methodist side, was purchased in 1808 by the Montgomery Street Methodist Church. They had both Black and white parishioners, both free and enslaved. What happened here was, in that church in 1816, the African Americans decided, we've had enough of this, different treatment. We want our own church. They agreed to that. That church was then right here on the corner where this building is now on 27th and Mill Road. This cemetery and the church, Black church, were known as part of the Underground Railroad. This was the first Black congregation in Washington, D.C. The Underground Railroad was a network of trails and hideaways for enslaved people to reach freedom. More than likely, they would find their way to free states or to Canada. You ready? People would hide in here with or without bodies being stored for burial. We know that some of the churches would leave food and clothing here, and all you had to do is follow the Rock Creek north, and you were on your way to Pennsylvania. It's important to preserve Black cemeteries because it's part of history. It tells a story. It honors our dead. And Black cemeteries seem to unfortunately be deliberately neglected. She migrated north after Emancipation and was enslaved. Her value was $1,137, the Love family. It's the people in these cemeteries and what they've accomplished, particularly in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century, is pretty amazing. And it's not what we were told in schools. That side was church run. This was the Female Union Band Society side. And so it's really important to tell the stories of those who lived there because they also tell us our story, our American story. Not just the one side of the story, but the whole story. And this is what historic Black cemeteries really lead us to.
Right, and I find it fascinating that there are several cemeteries that are part of the Underground Railroad.
Lisa Fager and I undertook the restoration and preservation of the grounds about 5 years ago.
A little like soup.
At the time, the cemetery, according to people who lived in the neighborhood, described it as unloved or uncared for. We've always known that the cemeteries were the final resting place for as many as 8,300 persons. People that are buried on more than 3 acres of land, literally elbow to elbow in rows. And one of the ways we wanted to get a better understanding of plausible number was not just through research of records, but to look into the ground. We used laser reflections from satellites that removed the vegetation, overlaying the ground and give us an image of the bare grounds. We use radar studies that penetrate the grounds at different levels below the surface and look for ground disturbances caused by graves. The cemetery consists of not only the plateau, but the hillsides that flow down to a creek below. Since the early 1800s, the hillsides, they were the burial places for people as well. They suffer significant grounds erosion and just normal vegetation growth that overtakes the graves. Long ago, we undertook a goal of determining who was buried in the grounds. Or as a visitor to our grounds said, if you take the birth date and the death date, it's the dash in between, it's the space in between that interests us. This is the headstone of Dr. Colin B. Cruiser, Jr. His father and he are buried here in the grounds. Dr. Cruiser was one of the earliest African Americans to attend Howard University, studied at the School of Pharmacology and Medicine, and he became a physician to the Black community, Herring Hill here. He unfortunately died in his early 40s from tuberculosis. The Cruisers are a very large family, and also we found evidence of them being enslaved in Cuba. The Reverend Cartwright, who's entombed here, he was the early Black pastor, Mount Zion Church. And one of the things he did was to reassemble his blood family by purchasing his son from an enslaver in Virginia, purchased another son and daughter from another Virginian enslaver, and he purchased his wife, Susanna, who's interred with him, from yet a third family. We discovered that there was a remarkable community of enslaved people and freed Black persons living together. We learned about urban enslavement. In Georgetown, different than most places in America, enslaved people were permitted to learn to read and write. And it's not uncommon that they were managing the financial books or the business books for white enslavers who were not literate. Georgetown is only in the last few years started to, in an honest way, find the records that describe its Black history, particularly the topic of enslavement, and understand how Georgetown formed and how this mixed, integrated yet segregated society built our nation's capital, physically built it, and built it in terms of the businesses and the governance that we see today.
DC Emancipation Day ceremony is very special to me.
So we're here presenting coins in exchange and offering of remembering that anyone who's placed in here.
DC Emancipation compensation happened 8.5 months prior to Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed those who were enslaved in the Confederacy. The last 5 years, we've been hosting a day where we acknowledge all that had been emancipated or freed.
Because DC is always the experiment for folks who can't do things in their own states.
DC is the only ones who actually compensated their enslavers. The reading of the names, it's kind of a twofold complicated thing, knowing that enslavers were compensated, but also amazing, like in a celebration, because we know that those folks who had been enslaved are now free. And not only that, I think during the ceremony, showing people what the petitions look like and who the people were that were getting paid. I think it's important to remember that they weren't just a group of people who did free labor, and they were even more important in the fabric of this United States than we ever give them credit for. I think it's really important for descendants that this cemetery be saved.
I'm Neville Waters, a longtime resident of Georgetown, and I'm delighted to point out the headstone marker for members of my family. In particular, Charles, who was my great-great-grandfather, lived till he was 82 years old, was born in 1856, and was freed on Emancipation Day here in D.C. back in 1862. At the age of 6, I'm not sure that he even was aware of what that meant. They lived to be residents, homeowners. James, his brother, was a journalist. Charles worked for the federal government, saw multiple presidential inaugurations, and was one of the leaders of the Republican Party. I always felt a great deal of spiritual beauty, if you will, and inspiration from being here and knowing that I have a connection to the grounds.
I think a bigger story around African Americans in America, we want to connect to our past. And so the future is to connect the dots within Georgetown and outside of Georgetown. Like I said, we have connections to Mount Vernon and George Washington's family, James Madison's family, and I want to make sure people see those connections and understand how they work.
Copper skin.
I think that people are pretty lost because they don't know their history.
And this is what she received.
And if you just sit still and study what's around you, you'll just see that it just keeps repeating itself. And so it's a really good playbook to know your history.
These two people I wanted to highlight. This is James and Charles.